This podcast is brought to you by Reimagine Radio, the online radio station that aims to give you information on disability and music. My name's Graham Wyman, and I'm the program coordinator with the Vancouver Adapted Music Society. Today, I'm joined by Sylvie, macCormac, and Dave Symington. How are you two doing today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you. You know, it's funny because my mom used to say, I'm not macCormac, I'm macCormac.
Oh.
And I took the K off her maiden name, macCormac, so that it was a palindrome.
Okay, gotcha. That is true. That is true. That's funny. I just noticed
Sort
that.
of.
Yeah, almost, right?
Yeah.
Without that extra C. That's funny. Well, hope you two are enjoying the sun out today. I know Dave, for our listeners, he's outside, so you may hear a little bit of bird sounds. But yeah.
Well, you got to take advantage when you've got good weather. It's not going to last that long, apparently. So.
Right. Well, to jump right into it, and Dave, you know the drill. If you'd like to join in at any point, please do. But Sylvie, when did you know you had a passion for the arts, and what was the first instrument that you learned?
I remember hearing and loving Railway Trilogy by Gordon Lightfoot, around 9 years old, and loving art and literature. I just loved it, and thinking I'd like to be an artist and teacher. Mm-hmm. Then I was always writing poetry in my youth, and being given a classical guitar with plastic strings from a friend around 16 years of age, and learning the CGD chord and Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. Mm-hmm. And then I just started playing those chords and making up chords till I was making up chords that were like B sus, B flat sus 4 or something that I didn't know I was actually doing.
Right.
And I would just, you know, sometimes the words would come with the music and sometimes the poetry would come, and then it would just seem to form when I played the guitar.
Mm-hmm. Sylvie, how has your Celtic heritage, as well as being born on the Coast Salish territories, influenced your art, whether it be as an actor, as a composer, or creating landscapes?
So my mother and father immigrated from Ireland in 1956, and I was born in the city of Vancouver in unceded Coast Salish territory, which ranges from parts of BC into Washington states. Mm-hmm. So the greater awareness of being born in Coast Salish territory came throughout my life, hearing First Nations music, and it just, and then really it happened when I became a friend with mountain climber John Clark, who was given the name Quick Sulkin, meaning mountain goat. And he was a conservationist. I became involved in the Utsum Witness Project, which is where it's a ceremony in the First Nations where you're attending like a birth or a wedding or a marriage, and you are given a shell traditionally and tasked with remembering the event. So it becomes an oral history. So being involved with that from 1997 to 2007, I composed Witness Round Journey with 3 Squamish songs and many people's voices. And then I co-produced a CD with C. Swice, among other like community efforts to save a traditional territory of the Squamish Nation from being logged. And we were able to protect that, which is called a place of transformation. And so that was sort of significant for my awareness that I was an immigrant here, born on First Nation unceded Coast Salish territory. I remember hearing my parents playing the music of Ireland and the Irish Rovers, who were formed in Toronto, and the great Irish comedian named Hal Roach, who'd say a joke and then say, do that again, do that again. That was funny. And it would, I would just, so I suppose some of my humor comes from my mom and dad, the Irish humor. It's so dark. It's wonderful. And then the comedian Hal Roach, that's so funny. Do it again, do it again. And, but also the Americans like Nat King Cole, Tom Jones, Aretha Franklin. And my mother would say, you know, Elvis wasn't the king of rock and roll. It was Bill Haley and the Comets. Rock around the clock tonight. You're gonna rock, rock, rock. And that always stuck in my mind. And then my brothers and sisters would play the Beatles and Carole King and radio, you know, just from being born from the 60s onwards, you know. And then when I was raised by my single mother from the time I was 6. And so with her new community of the Greek people and the Iranian immigrants here, you know, they'd be playing bouzouki and recordings of contemporary and classical Greek music, and they would dance. So that really influenced me too.
Right. No, of course.
And then,
I was just curious, were you collaborating at the time too? I mean, I'm just kind of curious who you worked with in the early days, and you mentioned a lot of different artists that influenced you, but who did you, as you got into music and writing and being noticed and everything, did you have sort of an inside circle of people that you worked with or collaborated with?
well, no, this is really funny because I was playing guitar and singing, making up songs, but I began professionally as a clown and mask maker in theater arts. And so that's what I was doing with the Extraordinary Clown Band. So we were playing like circus and klezmer tunes, and I was playing the bass drum. So I wasn't trained on an instrument besides playing guitar and the big bass drum, you know, and I'd say, drum roll, please. And then the people would do a big drum roll. And I would literally roll over the drum in my costume as Spotty the dog or the old woman. And so I learned music really, you know, in that area of playing with the Extraordinary Clown Band. Then I went on to be a singer-songwriter. I was a picture framer. That was my trade. And then I moved, as well as that, I was a singer-songwriter, folk rock, and I would play with Sexy Pierre, Larry Davids, and on violin, and Blaine Dunaway on violin as well. Jazz and klezmer music people, and it's so long ago, but it was wonderful, and I played guitar, and then I was being diagnosed with MS, so that led me to, because I knew I would lose the ability to play guitar, so it led me to studies in the electroacoustic field with many of the teachers at SFU and directly with Barry Truax, which led me to soundscape composition. Which I will say is the folk music of electroacoustic, because you compose with context of sounds rather than the abstract sound samples, right?
No, for sure. Well, I mean, listening to your pieces too, they're so lush.
Thank you.
And just to give a sense to our listeners as well, is that like the way that you're able to layer sounds and create, you know, a crescendo within your piece of your soundscape.
You know, it's funny because only recently, you know, I've heard, wow, you have really good hearing. And my sister Melanie said, well, Mama's always saying that Sylvie has really good hearings. So is it genetic? Like I can hear sounds from far away. And even when I was at the folk festival recording for the soundscapes there, which was really amazing because I did those pieces in 1999 to 2002. I did 4 years called Festival Quartet for Solitude. So it comes out in 2002. It was on the pages. And then, oh my God, the pandemic started, right? So Vancouver Folk Festival, sadly, didn't have the large field, you know, of live performers. But they had a VFMF at home. And they included my festival quartet for Solitude in the 2020 VFMF, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it's 20 years later. So it's like, well, you know, the field, as you know, it's an academic field and it's a smaller field. It's non-pop music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of blah, blah around it, you know, not good or bad, right,
Yeah.
as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where are we now?
Yeah, so I guess like you kind of touched on it about being 20 years after, but over the years you've come back to your compositions to record new versions. What has fueled this expansion on, say, your original idea?
Well, I'd recorded the original Coastal Chants in 1992 with Blaine Janaway,
Mm-hmm.
and he was playing jazz violin on that. And so I wanted to, having met Dave, I talked to him about wanting to remix this track.
Mm-hmm.
And so in, so I sang in the studio, sang harmonies to myself, sang the song,
Yeah.
and then sang and played harmonica.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 2013.
Okay.
And then with Casper Ryan directing the video and Dave in the studio and me there,
Mm-hmm.
and Matthew Wald, and then that was the video of the feather. That was 1993 and 2013.
Yeah.
Then before my mom passed away, she asked why was I not playing with my friends anymore.
Okay.
So I invited those people who I'd worked with previously,
Mm-hmm.
Wendy Soloway on bass,
Yeah.
Ross Barrett. Ross Barrett, who plays saxophone incredibly, also who I played with in the Extraordinary Clown at the Folk Festival and the Children's Festival and all around town.
Mm-hmm.
Then I invited him, and then I said to Wendy, who you know, I'm looking for someone to notate the music, and so and play piano. And she's Brenda Baird. She had played with Brenda Baird in the women's jazz ensemble Mother of Pearl.
Okay.
And so I asked Wendy, Brenda came, Ross, and so that's how that.
Was the percussionist too? You invited a percussionist. Can't remember his
Oh, and
name.
the percussionist, sorry, yourself. Well, Dave was the percussion, and is the percussionist, right?
No, the other individual that brought in the different percussion instruments.
Russell Shumsky came in. Yeah, he had been an associate in the clown band, a colleague there.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a very long process, but it was really it was nice to move slowly and just kind of explore how we were going to do it. And then so in the end, I included those songs plus some of my work from my electroacoustic field,
Mm-hmm.
and then created a book, a story of my life, and
Yeah.
sort of autobiographical,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that came out in 2016 there, and yourself, you mixed some of the album there, and yeah, so that's The Feather 2016.
Yeah, no, I remember working on that. That was one of my very first, I think, projects starting with VAMS, like a year or two in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, Dave, I actually have a question for you. With what was it like, say, coming back to the first time that you guys were re-recording The Feather in 2013? What was that for you as the producer and engineer to come back or to help Sylvie transform it into a new way in 2013 and then in 2016?
Well, I mean, it was, I felt a really incredible project, and there's so much good material that, you know, it's always a joy. I mean, it was a long process, and there was quite a few people involved, but the whole mood and meaning behind it, and just the feel that Sylvie brings, and her passion for it makes it easy, and always turns out, I mean, I think about the live concerts we did too that were just so joyful, and I think the audience often is kind of just transfixed. It's such a unique sound. But I don't recall exactly how long the project took from beginning to end, probably a year and a half or two, I think, by the time we got everything mixed and packaged and done. And but it was really just a rewarding project to bring different people in, Brenda and Wendy and Ross. It's hard to imagine everybody jammed into that small studio we had at the time. We made it work. And there's moments in there that I'll never forget, like Ross's solo.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it was just, it's like Roland Kirk reborn. Yeah, everybody's just very committed and talented, and I'm honored to be part of that. So, I kind of wanted to ask you a question, Sylvie, just more about soundscape, because it's not something I fully, I don't know if understand is quite the word, but what do you hope to people to gain from the experience of immersing themselves in soundscape? Does it depend on what soundscape project you're doing? Is it a standalone thing where I can listen to it? And, well, what is it that you're trying to give people by producing this?
Well, speaking of soundscape, like I can hear your voice and then the birds in the background and the dogs. And so if you think of landscape and soundscape, Armour Schaefer, Canadian composer, came up with the word. He was working in the communications department of Simon Fraser, and they began the World Soundscape Project. So him and his students, Barry Truax and Hilda Carden, Westerkamp included, went to England and measured the sounds between towns, and so it became the village soundscapes. And it was just wonderful to explore, the sound. How far could you hear the dog or the bird in the next village, or the train, and how does sound influence people? What is sound about? What's your favorite memory? So electroacoustic is a really huge umbrella term, within and computer music. So the old academics would work with, it's quite a complex and long history. Like if you look up on Google the electroacoustic, and then you look up soundscape. Soundscape has more to do with context, like I say, rather than just using the sound. Like there was one early composer who used the sounds of trains to create a piece. It had nothing to do with context of trains. So you could do a soundscape piece about an imaginary journey or a realistic journey, and so soundscape can be abstract. And it's just the beauty of the sounds in our environment, in the landscape, the audio landscape. If you think of a soundscape, it's an audio landscape. And then, to me, I made up the sentence. Soundscape composition is the folk music of electroacoustics, because it has a period. And I say that because it has a context, so it centers you in wherever that piece explores, right? So if I was to do a portrait of Dave, I would ask about your relatives, your ancestry, the sound, what was your favorite early sounds, what sounds do you remember? And so I would do an interview with you, so you would be speaking, and then some of those sounds would come in and out of the piece. So it would represent sort of a portrait, an audio portrait of you, and which is like, I've done really abstract pieces, but I've done more specifically like, okay, this relates to where you are. You're in, where did you say you are?
Well,
Dave?
maybe the soundscape will identify that.
Pardon?
Eventually. No, I'm in a little park in Athletes Village.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Just as I stopped speaking, and before you started speaking, there was an amazing bird. Did you hear that, Graham?
Yeah, no, it was again like a crescendo
Oh,
that came out.
There's
yes.
blackbirds. They're quite dominant.
Yes.
That's what I hear a lot.
And Sylvie, I love that description about how it's the landscape. It's like, what's the bird sound like in the other town? What is that I think that's a perfect way to paint what you do with your sound.
An audio landscape.
Yeah.
We could Google that and see. I'm sure somebody has said that or used that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like that. When I was at the folk festival, I'd hear like a shakuhachi being played on stage too, mm-hmm. way in the distance, and then I'd be closer to maybe a jazz band, and then I'd hear a bird, mm-hmm. and it would be singing between the two stages, right. And I swear it sounded like it was like in syncopation with both the shakuhachi and the electric guitar in the distance, mm-hmm. and the bird, and it was like, oh my God, it's like my ears opened wider. And it's so funny because ears are really sensitive, but when we write, like you'll say, I'll look forward to, we use a lot of sound, mm-hmm. and visual, like, yeah. phrases, but mm-hmm. like, I'll see you later, mm-hmm. instead of saying, I'll hear you later.
Yeah. No, that's very true. So
that puts things in a really good context for me, because having been to the folk fest a number of times, I definitely know that experience of hearing music coming from numerous sources when you're wandering around the fields and the backwoods. And I must say, I will never forget that moment when I can't remember which stage it was. It's on the west side, and I was sitting under a tree. It was quite a blazingly hot day. And I saw you on the top of the hill.
Oh.
You remember what happened?
I was going up in my red scooter, and I didn't realize that the hill was so steep.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was hitting air.
Oh, wow.
And I was heading into space. And all of a sudden, I was going upside down, and I landed backwards, upside down, in my red scooter, and not a broken, nothing.
Oh,
I was
goodness.
Perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. And another time, it's so funny. I mean, I'm yeah.
No, it was one of those things for me you can't forget, because I felt so helpless being over where I was, and I couldn't even get to where you were. I know they brought in the paramedics and whatever.
Oh my God. It's
I think the last folk festival, didn't we do a bit of recording together?
Oh yes, I would actually have friends and associates come in and record, and then use some of their field recordings. Now I did 1990 to 2002, but I have 10 years of recordings of so when I eventually get to it, because I'm so busy now, but I would like to do a 10-year portrait of the folk festival. Oh, right. That's coming, but that'll be like who knows when.
Right.
But it's funny because I met Dave at the Chan Center for a VAMS event, okay. and various times throughout the year. So I began the feather we did the feather song in 2012, 2013, mm-hmm. and then started the feather album, which included the jazzier, picking my songs. And I wanted to kind of have a jazzy feel. That's why Ross and Wendy, jazz player, bassist, mm-hmm. and Brenda Baird is known as Brenda Keys, because she was a jazz piano player. And that was begun later, mm-hmm. and then it's funny because I started the Wheel Soundscapes in, like, Dave and Sam Sullivan co-founded VAMS in 1988. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, 87, 88. Yeah.
And then and I met Dave as a friend, I guess, throughout, until like 2012 when I said to him, would you like to do this thing? But I had previously, in 1998, when I was going to Simon Fraser, and I heard the radio ballads that were done by Peggy Seeger and another fellow, Ewan McCall was, and then Charles Parker was the producer. And that was the first audioscape with people with disabilities, people with polio. So then I got this idea. I'd seen the ad in the Georgia Strait about VAMS in the studio, and I had an idea to do the Wheel Soundscapes with the voices of people with disabilities. So I went to the office and met Sam Sullivan and discussed my idea and began composing, which with interviews and oh my goodness, it's so fun to do those pieces. So my first one was Danny a Portrait, and then with Anastasia Rudkevich Briggs, I did Sound Compassion, and she sang like, it is so beautiful, right? So I got to weave her voice in. And then the third one that I did was Penny Process. Yes, and that became on the Canadian Electroacoustic Committee's one of their CDs. And then I did another one, and it was chosen for Canadian Electroacoustic.
To end our first segment, we are going to be listening to Railway Lines, Trains of Thought. Do you mind just telling us, our listeners, briefly what the piece is about?
Well, Railway Lines acoustic tracks. I played guitar, and my friend Gordon Cobb, who worked with in the Sarah McLachlan School of Music playing piano, he built me actually a really cool cat, which is what you put a microphone inside to stop the wind. And he did that in his before he left for England. But so that was a folk song. Okay. And then I took the little trains from the Railway Club with big trains from the World Soundscape Project and text of my own, and I overlapped that with the song, with the acoustic song, and that became Railway Lines, Trains of Thought.
Well, great.
So what is it about? Well, it's actually, when I'd done the Wheel Soundscapes, I would say it's wheel number 5 or 6, and it's a self-portrait of myself. And being born here, and my dad's journey across the train from Ireland. Oh, well, I joke and I say he took the train from Ireland to Canada, No, he took a bus. And his train broke down in a little place called Wawa, which I learned later is one of Glenn Gould's favorite places.
Okay.
And everybody's train or car breaks down in Wawa in Northern Ontario, right?
Okay.
So it was funny to learn that later. But yes, Railway Lines, trains.
The big Canada Geese is, I think, right?
Is it?
Wawa, there's a huge sculpture statue of a Canada Geese there.
And isn't there a guitar pedal? Just joking.
Oh, very good, very good.
The wah wah.
Yeah, the goose setting the guitar.
Yeah. Well, both of you, thank you so much for joining us for this first section. And stay tuned next week. Stay tuned next week as we will be having part 2 of my interview with Sylvie and Dave.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Dave.
mother and father came from Ireland in 1956. My father took the train out first. He poured sugar on his dinner because he thought it was the salt shaker. It was a very sweet beginning. I had an idyllic childhood in Kitsilano, philosophizing and climbing trees, swimming 12 hours a day and dreaming by the sea. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. Did you see it coming? All of it is blind. Like horses, I loved the wind. Driving in the country with my family, I pretended horses were running alongside, leaping and bounding. I'd put my hand out the window to practice how to fly with the horses. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. At 16, I dreamt people dressed in white came out of the sea. When they were leaving, I asked if I could go with them. They told me when I had completed my work, I could return with them to the sea. When I was 21, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Every year I would get sick, and every year I would get better. Every year I would get sick, and every year I would get better. Every day I would get sick, and every day I would get better. Every day I would get sick, and every day I would get better. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. When I was in my 20s and clowning around in white face and full regalia, heading back to the Children's Festival, seagulls started diving at me, chasing me all the way into the black hole. I journeyed there with Manitou until I left the planetarium to the sunlight and circus tent. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. When I was a spotted dog in the band, I would tumble over a big bass drum whenever a drum roll was called for. Drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. When I was an old woman in the parade, I carried my teapot and wilted flowers, pouring magic into the hands of those young at heart who still believed. Who still believe, who still believe. I was a strong child, I was a brave child, I was a strong child, I was a brave child. When I was 28, I was swept off my feet and bound fast by a golden chain within a gilded cage. For 6 long years I endured within an insanity that was not of my own making. Far away from everyone I knew and loved, far away from the earth, it was as if I was on a dark, scary planet with no hope of return. With the help of others, I was finally able to free myself. On leaving, the last dream I had was of being in a room with charred red and black bodies of people, living and dead. Standing, sitting, or laying on cots. When one of them went to touch me, I left the room, leaving the insanity behind. I went crashing out the window, falling 5,000 stories. When I hit the ground, I hit it hard, but I had nonetheless returned to earth. How many more do not survive a journey of abuse? How many more do not survive? How many more do not survive a journey of abuse? How many more do not survive? I was a strong child. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. Desperate to find home, I sought familiar places and faces, falling in literary love, falling in literary love, falling in literary love. The sun tower, the marine building, the railway lines, the mountains and the sea, all spoke to me of memory and of coming home, of coming home. What would your mother say? What would our brother say? All those landmarks and people were like beacons in a storm, as I was sounding to echolocate the direction home. I fell even more in love with myth and creativity, the sounds of nature and of moving trains. I tried to piece together the shards of the mirror that had cracked at 28. I sought solace in the sea and poetry. I sought solace in the sea and poetry. I sought solace in the sea and poetry. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. I was a strong child. I was a brave child. On nearing home, a great eagle flew into my life, promising me healing and insight. But this eagle had also been betrayed by abuse and had turned to the love of power and false masks. This great bird taught me that even eagles can fall like humans can, and to be a different kind of bird, to be aware of the abuses of power. Now I shall be an eagle that rides the wind for love, not of power, but purely for the senses and the sound. For love of sense and sound. Now I have taken the soul train home to Canadian soil. I have taken the soul train home. I am home. I am still walking. My heart is still beating. I am still calm. I am home. I am still walking. My heart is still beating. I am still calm. I am still brave. I am still calm. I am still brave. To the